Part of the modernization thing is people not feeling comfortable on the land, not knowing the land well, not recognizing perhaps that they share the land with the animals, and each of those kinds of animals has their own personal character. And you need to know that if you're going to hunt them. You have to know what the animal is thinking when he first discovers that he's being tracked, when he tries to escape, and then when he is down to the bones, the remains, and those remains are put up so that the dogs don't get them. Relationships with animals is one of the most difficult things to explain. But it's like ownership, except in this case, the Crees believed that they learned from the animals, that they learned how to hunt from other hunting animals, and that they learned the skills, even the tools, from watching animals using them. Beaver have pronounced incisors, right? And in some museums, you'll find from James Bay the maxilla and incisors of a beaver was used as a chisel to make wooden plates to eat out of or other wooden implements. The beaver uses his teeth as chisels. Okay? The origin story has the first man and the first woman coming down to the earth and being taught by a bear. Okay? Seeing that the bears survive the winter, but they do it solitary. First man and first woman want to sleep together. Okay? So that doesn't go for them. They check around for a more family-oriented group. Beavers. Beavers have a house, okay, which they make themselves very well. They work hard at what they do. Once had a little correspondence with Nemaska man, George Wapache, who was chief for many years, and before that, negotiator in the James Bay Agreement. I was asking about beavers, and he said, well, you know, sometimes I wonder, is it that beavers are like Crees or Crees are like beavers? He said. And he said, you know, I once went to the top of a beaver house in the evening, very, very quietly, and I listened, and I could hear them in there. It sounded like they were gossiping. Okay, gossiping. Okay. Beavers are really good at child rearing. Older beavers are really good at checking out what the younger beavers have done, checking the condition of the dam every night to make sure there isn't something urgent, and so on. I spent quite a lot of time on Crees and beavers, wrote a paper on it, maybe 2. And so it is with other animals, too. The early tools in the bush were bone, horn, teeth, kind of horn. So the relationship, what I'm saying, was intimate. People knew the animal's personal characteristics. They knew the animal's technical skills, their hunting strategies, and so on. And they believed, so suspend your own beliefs for a minute, they believed that at some level the animals loved them, which is why their tracks could be found in the first place. Didn't mean they wouldn't try to escape if they were being pursued, but that was more like a game. Pursuit, almost like, I don't know, a horny man pursues a cute girl, okay? It's not an incidental similarity. They believed that the caribou were sort of the dumb blondes of the animal domain, where others, like the wolverine, were quite the opposite. Others, like the bear, well, bears don't freeze to death. Bears are unlikely to starve to death. Bears are stronger than humans. They may be smarter than humans. And so on. So what people knew of the bush life was an ethic of respect for all life. Now here I'm going to start talking like a eco-freak, but it's true. It's true. Respect even for the animals that weren't very valuable. You wouldn't respect a rabbit in the same way that you would respect a bear. That'd be nuts. But you understood that rabbits might be what keeps you alive if you have a bad year. Fish, if you have a bad year. Those are the fallback foods. So the animals give themselves so that humans can live, but this is at some kind of a, I'll risk calling it spiritual level. The Crees had hunting songs. The songs were not about animals. The songs were to animals. They were like prayers. They sound a little like Gregorian chants. And so there's a whole domain of experience that you don't get even if you own a goat and you milk it. Okay, you can give the goat a name. You can like the goat. I once had a couple of goats. It was when I was chairman of the department. And people's egos were driving me crazy, but I could go down in the morning and the goat was glad to see me and I would get nice milk from it and I'd go to work and juggle egos, and then I'd come back at night and goat would be glad to see me and give me some good milk again. And that's good, but that's nothing like the Cree relationship with animals. It doesn't even begin. So relationships with animals were central. What do you do now with a kid with a smartphone and a screen? What does he know about animals? Well, if there's a dog running loose, he might wing a rock at it. If somebody brings in geese from a goose hunt, you might like some. On the other hand, I was at a feast in Saskatchewan, I think it was, where the kids preferred hot dogs to geese. Oh, what a mistake, okay? But, it has the modernity, the panache of being part of the world and so on. Okay, so that's just really a hint, I guess, of the importance of animals there. And one of the good ways to get into it in any depth is to read a lot of stories. Cree Ontology. I told you a little bit about a younger brother that married a beaver. Well, I'm going to have to tell you a little bit more about it. Not the whole thing, because that would take an hour. But he goes first looking for a wife, and the first thing he sees is a beaver woman. And so he calls to her and says, "Will you come out and be my wife?" "Okay," she says. She comes out. And he says, "You set up the meat swap and I'll get us some supper." He kills the beaver, and which is okay. Brings the beaver. The meat swap isn't up yet. Takes her a while, but finally it says, when you bring a beaver to a meat swap as a hunter, you don't go in. You open the flap and put the beaver in. And then your wife greets the beaver. Hospitality, okay? So that's what he did, I guess. When he went in, he noticed that the poles were all clean of bark. My, she's very tidy. So they go to bed, and he wakes up in the morning, and he looks at his wife's face. And in those days, beavers didn't look like they do now. Their hair was kind of matted, and their teeth were black. He thought, my, she doesn't look very nice. So he said, "I can't stay with you. You don't look nice enough." Well, he goes through a number of other possible wives. And I won't take you there. You can read the story for that. But in the end, he's despondent. He's gone all over the bush, and he's tried this woman and that woman, and they've all been willing to give it a try. And about that time, the beaver woman is crying to her grandmother that the boy left her. His grandmother said, "Stop crying," she said. "That boy's coming back to you. Polish your teeth, comb your hair." Sure enough, "Will you come out and be my wife?" "No," she says, "if you want to be married to me, you're going to have to come into the water and live like beavers." And to make a long story short, he does. And gradually becomes more and more the appearance of a beaver. His older brother is not at all pleased because the younger brother teaches the beavers that they're too easy to hunt. You have to start making your houses stronger and more than one exit. Emergency exits. Humans are having a hard time killing beavers. His older brother is very angry, determines to kill him. They finally manage to catch up with the beaver boy and his wife, and they close off all of the exits but one. And the older brother stands there with his axe. Finally, the beaver boy says, "We're going to have to try to escape. You go first." Well, of course, she gets hit on the head with the axe and killed. And his older brother says, "I told you you'd have a hard life if you tried to have a wife from animals. Now come out." So he sort of humbly comes out, goes to his older brother's michwap. The older brother announces they're going to have a feast. Everybody's welcome. The younger brother figures, well, I guess I know who the feast is going to be. So he tells his brother, "If the meat of a female beaver should touch my lips, you'll see what will happen. I can only eat male beaver," which was what he brought to his wife in the first place. Okay. Well, of course, the older brother tries by subterfuge, and so he mouth touches the meat of his wife. And suddenly, in the middle of the winter, all the rivers and lakes, the ice breaks up. Great roaring and crashing, and the younger brother is out of that michwap like a shot, with his older brother in a spear in his hand in hot pursuit. Younger brother makes it to a river, dives in, he's fast. He swims. Older brother trying to catch up. Finally, the younger brother comes to James Bay. He swims out, and the older brother realizes he's too far out now. So he picks up an enormous boulder, conjuring, and throws it. You can see that rock still. It's called Stag Rock, but it's a huge boulder. And the younger brother stays out in James Bay and grows until he becomes known as the Great Beaver. Now, what has happened here? This is a story about a marriage and what went wrong. No. This is a story about ontology. How did that younger brother wind up for marrying who he did? Solitary, monstrous size, transformed into something not human. It's a calamity. He's lost. He's lost his humanity. He's lost connections with anything, including beavers. So this is when you go across the line. Ontology, cosmology, all of these very abstract things have their counterpart. And the fact that it looks like an absurd younger brother and a series of mistaken marriages, that's just the funny part. And the funny makes you chuckle. And then he hits you, the storyteller hits you with something very profound. You have lost your humanity. You are a monster. The Cree word for the cannibal monster a week ago is a touche. Brian Craik, being able to, asked an old storyteller one time, so would that big beaver be an Atouche? The old man thought for a minute. He said, yeah, he's a monster. Atouche translates monster. Okay, not just a guy with too much hair and a taste for human flesh. A monster. Okay. Booming right along here. Okay, I told you about the importance of Edward Sapir for me intellectually, theoretically. Method. Sapir once went to a conference of social scientists sponsored by the federal government, U.S. government. And the psychologists were talking about all their methods, and the economists about their methods, and the sociologists about their methods. Sapir came up and he said, I'm not aware of having any method whatsoever. In my opinion, ethnography is a spirit and a technique. Period. Okay? Well, that was very influential for me. I remember it. I remember other things, quotes from Sapir too, but I won't try to make it through them. Pete Hallowell was a guy who spent his career going back and back and back to the Barrens River in western Ontario and eastern Manitoba. And he had a partnership, kind of like John Blacknut. He had a partnership with a man who was educated, spoke English, and who was a chief there, partly in recognition of his sophistication. And Hallowell wrote over a period of a full career, and he wrote about similar kinds of things. And he also was a very nice man when I knew him. He was quite old when I knew him, but I spent some good time with Pete. And he had to start off a greenhorn, maybe not off a plane, but off the ferry that went around the coast of Lake Winnipeg. And he was sent there by his professor to find out if cross-cousin marriage was still practiced at Norway House. And when he finally got to Norway House, he put his question into ethnographic terms, and the guy looked at him and said, well, who else would you marry? Well, that solved that question. And what do you do now? Well, I'm not too sure, but anyway, Hallowell became ethnographically deep. I regard myself as ethnographically deep. I'm patting myself on the back, but it only took me 53 years. And you want to be ethnographically deep? I challenge you. Do it for 53 years and you'll get there. Anyhow, a little belligerent there, sorry. Hallowell wrote about dreams. He wrote about ontology, worldview, conjuring. Has a wonderful book, a little monograph on the shaking tent. And so I've had a lot of guidance from Hallowell. And so, yeah, that's important. Shaking tent ceremony, well, a man goes into a tent shaped somewhat like a barrel, and people gather around, and as it gets well into dusk or maybe dark, the tent begins to wave a little bit. It doesn't shake like that, in my experience, but it waves back and forth. And then you hear voices. The conjurer's voice, but then you hear voices that are distinctly different. And these, it is said, are the voices of spirits entering into the tent. And a conversation goes on. And it may be about where to find animals, it may be about things that are going to happen in the future, or it may be about how this guy has been trying to conjure against me and I'm going to get him. It is an extension of human abilities beyond human abilities. And no strict delineation there, I think. But it was regarded as a part of life. My job when I recorded the conjuring tent was to present it in a way that did not exoticize it. Well, yeah, that part, the voices and so on, kind of exotic. Well, what's really going on inside? How in the hell would I know? I wasn't inside. You know, were there spirits in there? I don't think so. But can I prove it? No. Am I going to tear the tent down while the guy's in there? No. Although that was threatened once by people at another community who also told the conjurer that if he did that again, they were going to throw him in the lake. And so he came to Wisconsin instead. looking for a little appreciation there, and an anthropologist. And so, is it spiritual? Yeah, it's spiritual. Spiritual is a word that means something like ownership, or some of these other difficult terms. Spiritual, well, what's the word for spirit? Manitou. Okay, Kichi-Manitou. That's high God. We can probably thank missionaries for that. You can't have too many Manitous in Christianity. You just got to have one. So when they started hearing about Manitous, they were quick to point that out. But then it turns out that there are other stories about Manitou, like Manitou being invited to an eat-all feast. Eat-all feast is where all the meat must be consumed before people leave. And Manitou was having difficulty and finally couldn't quite finish his. He begins to sound more like the trickster. There's a reason for that. The trickster is spiritual. Okay? The connection between Manitou, or Kichi-Manitou, and the trickster is a whole other problem. But there is a concept behind Manitou, which I found rather late in my career, with the aid of a former graduate student and a colleague. There is a sometimes named and never seen provider, the source of our ability to find animals and live. A little bit like Yahweh, okay, in the Garden of Eden and so on, with the exception that the fall from the Garden of Eden doesn't occur, and it doesn't get blamed on Eve. There is a story, which I can't go into here, but a very good one, about the first man to have a spirit helper. And because his wife tries to look at them when she thinks they're all asleep, they get mad and go away. She apologizes to her husband, says, I guess we're going to have to try to make amends. He says, no, they're too much trouble. We'll just have to try to live without them. Rather than blame his wife, he blames them because they were putting themselves over her. Won't go there. Kind of nice. Anyway, so Manitou, there's a lot there, and there are a lot of Native people that won't agree with what I've just said, and that's okay because, you know, that's the way it is. Cree evangelism today. Yes. As part of our book, we had to have a chapter on religion. And there are 3 or 4 or maybe 5 churches besides the Anglican and the Catholic at Moose Factory. And I told my group that I work with, I can't touch this with a 10-foot pole. I would be crucified or something. One of the other members wrote a beautiful thing on spirituality that would offend no one, fundamentalist, high church, you name it. So spirituality has become specialized. It includes people who now rely on ceremonials from out west, Plains Cree, so on. And so it's a pretty heterogeneous thing where in the earlier days it was either the Catholics or the Anglicans or the bush ethic, spiritual ethic, which was spiritual, which was concerned with the spirituality of people and animals and the rest of the earth and so on, okay? Still pieces of that to be given credit. Anyway, we've got something to say about it, and we don't want to ruffle any feathers. But people are inclined to be able to merge things. And I wrote a little paper on that a while back. And Sometimes it causes some friction. When somebody was using a powwow drum at a evangelical meeting, some people were disturbed, others not. I was there. The first time it happened at Waskaganish. These young guys came from Moose with their, and Albany, I guess, with their big drum, and the young people were fascinated, and they came up, and they stood close, and then the older men were standing back, and I was standing next to a former chief. And his comment was, "I never heard drumming like that before," because traditional drumming in James Bay, at least Dick says so, and a few other people, one man singing, one drum, small, quiet, singing to the animals, okay? You bring a powwow drum in, that's strange. So when he said, I'd never heard anything like that before, I said, "I think they're from out west." "Oh," he said, "do you think they're coming back?" Not welcome. Okay. So evangelism, yes. I initially was prejudiced against it. And then I thought, I'm not supposed to be prejudiced, right? I'm an anthropologist, I'm a Quaker, what am I doing being prejudiced? I realized that at the very least, it is a temperance movement. These guys usually come from families where drinking is popular, from a peer group where drinking is popular, from a peer group with an uncertain future individually and as a group, and they get a discipline. And the discipline includes no booze, no acting up, and so on. So it's a temperance movement. Contemporary Cree identity is a part of that. One of the drummer's mothers commented, she was from Moose Factory, and she said, "I don't understand what they're doing, but he doesn't drink anymore, so I'm in favor of it." Okay. Contemporary identity is like a blend of songs that are like prayers, Hank Williams, Anglican hymns, evangelical hymns, so on. It's an amalgam. And it's a matter of finding a way to live together. And they do. It's a matter of maintaining mutual respect for things that you don't think you understand, and in some cases it's really hard to respect them. And I'm pretty confident that it'll work. I see. I'll take a 2-minute anecdote. I was reporting to the Grand Council when they were having a meeting at Waskaganish about problems at the schools at Fort George. And they'd called a couple of Indian Affairs guys to be there. And I told them they had problems because they weren't getting new textbooks, and the teachers were using the same textbook year after year, and the kids were getting, in some cases, the same textbook year after year. And nothing was happening. And so I suggested that the Crees needed a school board of their own so that they could make decisions and then work with them or not as the decisions work. And then the younger Indian Affairs guy said, "Well, we've put a lot of money into the school at Fort George, and we've replaced oranges and fire extinguishers." And I said, "I'm not speaking for myself here. I am speaking only for myself. I'm not speaking for anybody else. But why is it when I tell you that education is not happening, you tell me about fire extinguishers and door hinges?" He blew up. Billy, who was Grand Chief at that time, smiled broadly and said, "Well, time for a coffee break." When somebody loses it, you stop. If people can't laugh or at least be good-humored about it, it's not working. Stop. And I think that principle is what gets people through periods of rapid change. Stop.